Good, everyone. How are y'all doing? How was lunch? Good to see everybody. I'm Rafael Clemente, and I got to ask a question. How many been in Palm Beach County a long time? Born and raised. How many remember when this space was the Safari Club? Oh, man, right? Thank God they didn't have social media and digital photography back then, right? Yeah, who, if they could have told us then that we would be here now doing this great work, we'd have never believed them. Because we weren't doing great work at the Safari Club. I'll just tell you that. So, I'm Rafael Clemente. I am with Quantum Foundation's place-based initiative, Palm Beach Venture Philanthropy, which is a impact investing program designed to leverage philanthropy and private capital to make long-term, meaningful investments in Palm Beach County's communities of concentrated poverty. I'm joined by the rest of some of the Quantum team. I see Elsa, Camden, and Dominique, and I know Eric Kelly is in the room somewhere. Wave your hands. I'm so proud to be part of this team, which I'm relatively new to, but Quantum has been doing really important, impactful work in Palm Beach County for about 3 decades now. And I'm going to call to the stage now. I'm going to introduce them, my fellow panelists. And I'll introduce you, and while I read your bio, come on up, please. Dr. Leslie Ford, Associate Director of Race and Equity Research at the Urban Institute. Dr. Ford specializes in research and policy advising to address racial inequities. She leads initiatives focused on diversifying the healthcare workforce, expanding Black maternal health programs, and promoting leadership development for racial equity leaders. Dr. Ford also spearheads Black Family Thriving, an effort to build wealth among Black middle-class Americans. With extensive experience evaluating grant programs and advising funders, her work drives impactful, equity-focused solutions. Let's hear it for Dr. Ford. Thank you for joining us. And I'll start by referring to her as my friend and my colleague, Upendo Shavaz, CEO of North End Rise. We've worked together for a long time, so it's great to do this with Upendo as part of this panel. Upendo, CEO of North End Rise since August of 2024, bringing over 20 years of nonprofit and philanthropic experience to that organization. Previously, Upendo served as the Regional Vice President for Allegheny Franciscan Ministries and held leadership roles at the United Way of Palm Beach County and the Palm Beach County School District. She is a former social worker, and she excels in relationship management and is recognized for her work in the fields of place-based investment and trust-based philanthropy. And Upendo holds degrees from Florida State University and certifications from the University of Miami. So today's topic, poverty, place, and race. Being an urban planner, I had to kind of go back and satisfy the nerd in me and dig into the causes, the reasons about how we got here. I think of places as things that are built and created over time, and every plan, whether it's a plan for a business, a community, a trip, there's intentionality behind a plan. And I'm going to dig into some of the reasons that drove the factors that put us where we are today and have created many of the challenges that so many of you work on day to day and are here to learn more about. So historically, Black neighborhoods in Palm Beach County, including Pleasant City and Coleman Park in West Palm Beach, as well as areas in Riviera Beach, Lake Worth, and Belglade, embody the systemic challenges that have shaped racial and economic inequities across our region. These communities have long endured the consequences of discriminatory policies and practices that hinder wealth-building opportunities and concentrate poverty. And thankfully, a lot has changed. Some of the policies that were put in place 100 years ago don't exist anymore. But nonetheless, the damage that was done and the way the table was tilted against so many of these communities continues to drive challenges. So, as I said, I did go back. I went and found West Palm's first plan, drafted in 1923 by a fellow named John Nolan. Oh, I'm not changing the slides. Thank you so much, Upendo. Good to have a friend with, always has your back. So in West Palm Beach, for example, and this is not unique to West Palm, it's just a plan that I could find. West Palm's municipal zoning policies played a significant role in enforcing racial segregation. The Nolan Plan from 1923 for the city explicitly separated residential areas by race. The map you see on the right of the image is a redlining map. I couldn't find one for West Palm Beach, but I did find one for Miami, for what is now Dade County. All the areas noted in red were deemed as hazardous. What was hazardous about them was they were black communities. They were deemed as hazardous. So they were at a serious disadvantage if they could at all get home loan financing. And federal policies, such as those by the FHA and the Homeowners Loan Corporation, systemically excluded predominantly black neighborhoods throughout Palm Beach County and across our region. I never knew about this, and I was surprised that I didn't, but when I was preparing to come over to the Quantum team several months ago, the Belt of Blight was one of the list of recommended reading topics for me. The Belt of Blight is a report done by Leanne Lands, and when she was getting a master's degree at Florida Atlantic University in the mid-1990s. And the Belt of Blight looks at neighborhoods of concentrated poverty, predominantly along the I-95 corridor, and looks at all the factors that created these things. Enforced segregation by zoning, municipal zoning laws, how neighborhoods were excluded from accessing capital to buy houses. And those policies, many of them persisted into the 1960s, stayed on books until the 60s. Infrastructure has been used throughout the region, but again, speaking specifically to our local conditions here, to displace families, whether that was intentional or just by the way it was planned and implemented. Urban renewal programs. I-95, who remembers when I-95 was being built? Some of my early memories when 95 was being built. And as a kid, I grew up in South Lake Worth, so 95 was just west of my neighborhood, but it did split the neighborhood in half, and in fact, I think bulldozed a lot of houses in the process. One of my early memories. And then the impacts. Obviously, we've learned so much earlier. The presentation that was the morning plenary talked a lot. Oops. I'm way behind. Talked a lot about wealth impacts and the wealth gap. Schools and infrastructure have also contributed to this. So the plan that I talked about. In this plan, John Nolan's plan, this part is spelled out. It, meaning the city of West Palm Beach, must solve as best it can for its present and future population, streets and railroads, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All the things the city needs to deal with as growth happens. Remember, this plan was written in 1923. But then there's this piece of the plan, added a few pages later, included in this document, referencing at the time what was referred to as the Negro population. The question of providing for the future Negro population of West Palm Beach is one of the important problems that needs to be solved. So when I talk about intentionality, and I'll be honest, this is even hard to talk about now, but this is how we got here. Later on in the plan, a reference to how the railroad would bound the district practically on all four sides. The line of the railroad would thus definitely bound the district practically on all four sides. And in a few moments, I'll show you how that worked. And it also mentions here that it is not possible to legally set aside such districts and restrict them to any one color or race. In fact, pages arranged. In fact, in 1917, there was a Supreme Court ruling that deemed racial zoning illegal, but it was ignored in many municipalities, including Palm Beach County. And in this plan, what I found striking, John Nolan, a Harvard-educated land planner, basically told West Palm Beach as his client how to do it. How to get it done, even though he mentioned that it was not legal. He gave them a roadmap to achieve what was, at the time, their goal. Here's the map that was included in the plan, and you can see the area framed in red. That red rectangle, that is the area that we all now know as historic Northwest, Pleasant City, Coleman Park, from Banyan Boulevard to about 25th Street. And the city at the very early stage, and remember, anything west of the lakes, the Clear Lakes, was basically swamp or ag land. So the city was designated into 7 different districts, and you can't see it because it's small, so I've blown it up. They were the business district, the high-class section, what they called the medium white neighborhood. I love the terms that they used back then, right? And then the medium white and Negro neighborhood. And this notation will not improve. And I tried to dig in to find other references in this plan to what was meant by will not improve. And I don't know if the authors of the plan meant the neighborhood would not improve itself through investment, or if the city would not improve the neighborhood through investment. Unknown, but nonetheless, the notation there conveys intent, or belief, I should say. And there is the area that we, shown on the map, that are the Northwest neighborhoods, historic black communities in the city of West Palm Beach. And then infrastructure maps of the time. A street pavement map, and you can see predominantly no pavement in what were the historic black neighborhoods. The same thing can be said of water system maps not existing in that neighborhood. And the same thing can be said of sewer system maps not existing in that neighborhood. These are really, really hard things to confront, even 100 years later. But the point I'm making is that from the beginning, from the foundation of our municipal governments in the South, including in Palm Beach County, communities that today struggle with concentrated poverty were built and created in this way. And we have to acknowledge that as we go forward to find solutions, that this isn't something that's going to be done in a year or 5 years, or maybe even in 10 years. It's going to take time and investment and a plan, just like was done 100 years ago. Every one of us in this room has the opportunity to make strategic, intentional moves to change what exists today. So I'll go through this quickly because I know we got to make up time. This is today. This is grabbed from Google Earth yesterday, and I overlaid as best I could the historic Northwest, Coleman Park, Pleasant City, again, same area. And this is the south end of the neighborhood, and the red lines are train tracks. This is exactly what was talked about in the plan. The dotted line is a train track that used to exist. It's actually still in the ground, but it's not used anymore. That ran from the water plant over to the docks so they could take fresh water over to the town of Palm Beach. That's the south end of the neighborhood. That train track doesn't exist anymore, but all these properties are local, state, and federally owned properties that, those are the properties, framed in red. Some of them became industrial properties like Florida Public Utilities. And then on the south side, and I'll point with the laser, all these buildings here, all these buildings are predominantly government buildings. Again, local, state, and federal buildings. None of them open to the north. None of them have an entrance to the north. I worked in downtown for a long time as an urban planner, as the director of the Downtown Development Authority. That always struck me that could only be designed that way, that every one of those buildings and every one of those properties had no entrance to the north. It's as if the whole city is turning its back to the neighborhood to the north. At the north end of the neighborhood, this is just north of 25th Street. These are all train tracks, all the red. And I apologize, I do all my own graphics and all my own stunts, so this looks a little like, I was out there with a pen. But these are all train tracks, either in use currently or historically in use, that constrain that entire neighborhood to prevent it from expanding and growing. And in many ways hindered access So, and if you're a business owner, right? Anybody own business or property? Right? Access to your business is how you make your money, right? That's how you make your money. South of Banyan, the yellow line is Banyan Boulevard. That vertical yellow line is Banyan Boulevard. And I measured 1.5 miles south to Belvedere Road. There are 10 streets, not including arterials, not including Okeechobee Boulevard, et cetera. There are 10 neighborhood streets that cross the FEC Railroad to the east, south of Banyan Boulevard. There are only 4 that cross the FEC Railroad from Banyan Boulevard north. And when we talk about access, when we talk about mobility, when we talk about permeability of a place, I mean, if you think about what makes places thrive, roads are a big part of it, or lack of roads can make places have a challenge. Now, just very quickly about one of the ways we're going to start to fix this. As I mentioned, I'm the director of Palm Beach Venture Philanthropy. Our mission is to improve the economic conditions in neighborhoods of concentrated poverty across Palm Beach County. The definition of persistent poverty, and I'll thank my colleague Camden Baggs for putting so many of these slides together. You'll notice his work is a little cleaner than mine is. The definition of persistent poverty, if I'm correct, that's Brown University came up with that, where 20% or more of the population has been in poverty for 30 years or more, continuously. There are 24 of those census tracts or neighborhoods in Palm Beach County, 24 of them. Oops, that's what I meant to show you. And then using one example, and it is the most extreme example, I heard people talk about homeownership, educational attainment, crime rates, and other things. But when you boil it all down, the stress factors of living in a neighborhood of concentrated poverty unquestionably shorten your life. And in Coleman Park, the life expectancy, if you were born in Coleman Park today, is about 14 years shorter than the average of the rest of Palm Beach County. That is a stat that is hard to even think about. As the father of 2 daughters, it's hard for me to conceive that this exists in the United States of America in the year 2024. But it exists right here in our county. So why a place-based approach? And I heard those words today, this hyphenated word today, place-based, a lot. Because targeting investments in the communities that have been left behind is one way we start to address this problem. Everybody had psychology in this room, I'm sure. Everybody remembers Maslow, right? Remember Maslow? Your hierarchy of needs. The base of your pyramid, your physiological needs, food, water, shelter. After that, safety, security, love and belonging, all the things that make us whole people, make us succeed and make us thrive. A place has the same hierarchy of needs. I was at a session on Friday where the mayor of West Palm Beach, Keith James, invited Ray McGuire, a college friend and colleague of him, and Mr. McGuire's a legend on Wall Street, and they talked about how to help bring impact to neighborhoods of concentrated poverty, predominantly black neighborhoods across the United States, but talking specifically about our local area. And Mr. McGuire said, if that place isn't safe, don't even try to have a conversation with people about anything else, because that's all they can think about. That's all they can think about is, can I get to my house and back safely? Are my children safe? So until we start to address this, and the only way you address that is in the neighborhood, with the people that live there and that work there. If you don't get to that, you're not going to get to the rest of that pyramid. You're not going to get a place that's socially vibrant and has economic activity. You're not going to get to a place that is memorable and unique and special. These places were that, and they can be that again, and we need to set that standard and make that our expectation. So my slide didn't work. Well, those things that look like they're crossed out should be underlined. Look, it's underlined on my slide, okay? These are things that we have historically focused on: affordable housing, education and childcare, and access to services and healthcare. The other 7 on this list are place-based initiatives, right? And doing some reading in preparation for this, the National Institutes of Health did a study called The Social Determinants of Health. It's time to consider the causes of the causes. What's driving the need for the services? The need is being driven out of communities of concentrated poverty. If we start to address those things upstream, we start to decrease the supply of people that need help. How does this work in regards to the venture, Palm Beach Venture Philanthropy, and Quantum's continuum of programs that have for decades been making investments into Palm Beach County's well-being, the people in Palm Beach County, from basic needs to responsive grant making, and now the idea of venture philanthropy. Can we concentrate philanthropy? Can we recruit private capital and make investments in these places that keep the people in place, that minimize displacement, that return and restore economic activity, and that improve the environment so that people there can thrive? Can we put them on level footing? And what that plan looks like: people, place, and collective investment, and then evaluating our work over time as we go. And with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Ford.
Hello, good afternoon. I hope everybody can hear me okay. Again, my name is Dr. Leslie Ford. I'm an Associate Director in the Office of Race and Equity Research at the Urban Institute, and I am delighted to have the chance to speak with you today. Thank you to Dr. James Green and his entire team for giving me the opportunity to be in conversation with this amazing panel. Oh, no, can everyone hear me okay? Okay, wonderful. Okay, so I'd like to start with a point that I hope can ground our discussion for today, that across several key outcomes, whether that is health, wealth, education, or life expectancy, ostensibly race-neutral policies have failed to converge gaps for Black Americans, Latino Americans, indigenous communities, and some Asian American groups in the United States. One domain that has been particularly difficult to make progress on is the racial wealth gap. So my remarks will provide some context for and seek to answer the following questions. What is the racial wealth gap? How was the racial wealth gap created, and how is it maintained? And what are some potential implications for the racial wealth gap for upward economic mobility? And of course, what strategies can help to close the racial wealth gap? So I'll start with a definition for the racial wealth gap. The racial wealth gap is defined as the disparity in wealth between racial and ethnic groups in the United States. For the purposes of today's conversation, I will focus primarily on the discussion of the racial wealth gap between Black and white Americans, but there will also be comparisons between white Americans and other racial and ethnic groups in the United States. So I'm going to start with just a couple of statistics for us to consider. So first, the average white family holds about 6 times as much wealth as the average Black family. Wealth disparities for young Americans are even more stark, with young white Americans holding 16 times the wealth of young Black Americans before they turn the age 25. I want us to just think about that number for a moment, because the vast majority of us don't finish our undergraduate degrees until we're 20, 21, 22. So we want to think about for a second, how is it possible that one group could have so much more wealth or so much more advantage over another group at such an early age? I bring this up because to some researchers, the wealth gap is actually arguably more important or more consequential than the income gap. I'll say that again. To some researchers, the wealth gap is arguably more consequential than the income gap. So as everyone in this room knows, particularly those who are working on issues related to financial security and housing and good jobs for families, we know that income is incredibly important. It's what allows you to pay your rent or your mortgage on time. It allows you to pay your utilities, put gas in your car, and purchase groceries weekly for your family. Wealth is different. People sometimes think about wealth as access just simply to large sums of money. But increasingly, policymakers, practitioners, and others are understanding that wealth is also a form of resilience. It's access to savings to repair your car when it breaks down, or to pay a hospital bill if your child has an unexpected playground accident without getting behind on your rent or your bills. Wealth also enables individuals and families to invest in a secure future for themselves and the next generation. It allows individuals to start businesses, young people to attend college without crushing debt, and individuals and families to handle financial emergencies, economic downturns, and unexpected medical events without derailing their financial security. So one of the most important questions to consider as we think about the racial wealth gap is, how did we get here? And there are some key historical present-day factors that contributed to the development of and the maintenance of the racial wealth gap. So first and foremost, I would like to just mention the legacy of enslavement in the United States as one of the core sort of foundational factors that have contributed to the creation of the racial wealth gap. So this institution, along with the uncompensated labor and wealth extraction, along with the coinciding development of both the Southern economy and the United States economy, locked out or excluded African and African Americans from full participation in the US economy for hundreds of years. Following the end of the formal institution of enslavement, there were long periods of both de jure and de facto segregation that limited Black Americans' opportunities to build wealth over time. The historical research and analysis shows that the origins of wealth inequality and inequity lie not in personal choices or behaviors, but rather in policies, in programs, and in institutional practices which created and enabled wealth building for some families while creating many complex barriers for others. We find that the racial wealth gap persists even when we account for education, employment, and income. In addition to these historical factors, there are present-day factors that contribute to the persistence of the racial wealth gap. So systemic inequities and barriers often keep people of color from achieving economic security through employment, education, and home ownership, which results in racial disparities in both income and wealth. These disparities are the consequence of ongoing discrimination, structural inequality, and biases in our institution. A couple of examples of these include differences in income, which ultimately contribute to an income gap that exists both between different racial and ethnic groups and between different genders. It is also important to note that intergenerational wealth transfers are another way that the racial wealth gap persists. Since Black and Hispanic households, for example, tend to hold much less wealth, there are fewer assets to pass down to family members, compounding the racial wealth gap over generations. Thus, closing the racial wealth gap requires addressing policies, including structural issues such as discriminatory practices in education, in employment, and in retirement, including unequal access to high-quality education and job opportunities. So keeping in mind the factors that make wealth building impossible for some and very, very challenging for many others, I just want to be really clear that there are many promising solutions that, if implemented correctly, can actually help individuals and families build wealth. Just a few examples before I get into the next slide. So one is down payment assistance. So helping individuals and families not only purchase their first homes, but potentially purchase their second homes, along with home preservation programs to ensure that families are able to pass down homes intergenerationally. Another promising solution is guaranteed retirement accounts. So I am from Detroit, and I grew up in a context in which a lot of family members and friends all had pensions. And I remember when I started my first job in Washington, D.C., my aunt asked me about my pension plan. And I said, you know, Ann, that's actually not a thing anymore. I was like, I'm investing like in a regular retirement account. So ensuring that individuals and families have access to guaranteed retirement accounts. So if one is not provided by their employer, that they're actually able to invest in a federally guaranteed or a federally required guaranteed retirement account is another way to help ensure that families and individuals have access to wealth building over time. I'll also just briefly mention that baby bonds and other child savings accounts are another form or another way to help young people sort of get the start that they need to build wealth. And of course, other workforce-related programs that are designed to help families build income and savings with the goal of ultimately helping families purchase or invest in assets that can help them build wealth is another form of wealth building. So with the context that I've shared already in mind, I'm going to briefly walk through some slides that sort of explain the size, the scope, and the complexities of the racial wealth gap. Okay, so if you take a look at the slide on the screen, you'll see that this refers to the distribution of family wealth in 1963 as compared to the distribution of family wealth in 2022. So if you look at these two slides side by side, you can see that family wealth is increasing overall. At the same time that wealth has increased, wealth inequalities have been increasing steadily since the 1960s. In 1963, the wealthiest families had 36 times the wealth of families in the middle wealth distribution. By 2022, these same families had 71 times the wealth of families in the middle. It is also important to note that wealth gaps by race and ethnicity remain large over time. In 2022, the average or mean white household had 6 times the wealth of Black households and Latinx households. Over the last century, however, the dollar amount of the racial wealth gap, the difference in net worth held by white families and families of color, has grown substantially. By 2022, white families' average wealth was $1.4 million, more than $1 million higher than that of Black families and Hispanic families, compared to just $320,000 higher in 1983. I just want to maybe mention that the updated data do show that the Black-white wealth ratio has narrowed very slightly since 2019. As Black homeowners, as stock investors, and Black business owners have made some progress on narrowing or converging the racial wealth gap. Still, as you can see from this data, that there is still quite a bit of work to be done. So in addition, it's also important to note that the wealth gap widens with age. So if we consider people who were born between 1943 and 1951, when they were roughly in their 30s in 1983, white families had 3 times as much wealth as Black families on average. By 2022, when they were in their 70s, the average white family had more than 4 times the wealth of the average Black family. So this suggests that white families accumulate more wealth over their lives than Black or Hispanic families in the same age group, widening the wealth gap at older ages. So given these trends over time, I'll now sort of talk through some of the main drivers that contribute to wealth inequity. So this chart shows the average lifetime earnings among all people born between 1960 and 1964 by race or ethnicity and by gender. So you'll see women on the left, men on the right. So one of the drivers of wealth inequity is earnings. So a white man who was born between 1960 and 1964, who's now between the ages of 58 and 62, had earned an average of $2.9 million over his career, compared to $1.8 million for the average black man. Women also earned significantly less than men overall. Still, the gaps remain, as you can see from the bar charts on the left. The average white woman earned $1.7 million over her career, while the average black woman earned $1.3 million. I just want to be clear that the results that you're seeing are the consequence of labor market inequities. It has nothing to do with the roles that people are assuming, or there's also documentation or evidence, rather, of uneven pay across identical roles. So what we're seeing is a feature of discrimination, not because people are self-selecting into less high-earning positions. So next, exclusionary home ownership policies have disproportionately benefited white households at the expense of households of color, particularly black households in this country. So everyone in this room knows that home ownership is one of the main ways that people build wealth. 2002 estimates suggest that home ownership rates among black, Hispanic, and Asian families are increasing. However, black Americans remain the only racial group with a home ownership rate below that of 50%. Racial disparities in homeownership persist today because of the legacy of racist housing policies such as redlining and racial covenants, and at the same time, government policies have continued to subsidize and protect others' homeownership and wealth building, which I'll touch on in just a moment. So because of differential access to retirement plans and programs and differential earnings, black and Hispanic families also have less retirement savings than white families. Disparities in retirement savings have increased fivefold over the last 3 decades. In 1989, white families had about $50,000 more in average retirement savings than black families, and about $35,000 more than Hispanic families. About 30 years later, in 2022, white families had about $260,000 more in average retirement savings than both black and Hispanic families. One of the features that contributes to this disparity is occupational crowding. Occupational crowding refers to a situation in which a particular demographic group, like women, or black Americans, are disproportionately concentrated in a limited number of low-paying jobs due to discrimination. These jobs often lack opportunities for advancement or offer any form of retirement plan or program. Next, black and Hispanic families are less likely than white and Asian families to have emergency savings. So this chart shows the share of households with emergency savings equal to at least 1 month's income by race or ethnicity. These disparities that we see in emergency savings are the result of exclusionary policies such as redlining in the financial industry and means testing in public benefits programs that have historically penalized and discouraged people of color and lower income households from building savings. So this chart shows the share of all asset building tax subsidies families received in 2022. And I just want to draw your attention to the bar labeled mortgage interest deduction. So this is just one of the ways that the federal tax policy fails to help families with low incomes build wealth. So the majority of the mortgage interest deduction, this top bar on the screen, goes to taxpayers at the top of the income distribution. So 76.5% of the mortgage interest deduction goes to the highest income group. 17.2% then goes to the second highest income group. The lowest income group receives less than half of 1% of these deductions. And the same pattern holds true for state and local property tax deduction and retirement savings incentives. Thus, Black and Hispanic families, who on average have lower incomes, receive much more of these, or much less of these subsidies than white families. Lastly, this chart shows the share of households that received an inheritance. It shows that white families are more likely to receive an inheritance than families of color. In 2022, white families were about 4 times more likely than Black families and 5 times more likely than Hispanic families to receive an inheritance. Though these disparities have fluctuated in size somewhat, they have largely persisted since 1989. Intergenerational wealth transfers vary by race because of racial disparities in wealth and earnings. And urban research showed that the shares of Black and white families who intend or desire to leave a sizable estate are similar, but Black families are less likely, as I mentioned already, to be homeowners or to have the necessary large amounts of wealth and income to do so. So now that I've shared these 9 wealth inequality related charts and some of the causes and consequences of racial wealth inequity, I just want to briefly touch on some promising federal policies. So, as everyone knows, wealth inequality in the United States is a very complex and persistent challenge that requires bold policy solutions. The inequality is vast, in part because of policy choices that have been made, and it can be reduced by new policy practices and choices as well. So first, the local, state, and federal governments can institute or adopt early life wealth building accounts to help young people build wealth before they turn the age 18. Second, there is a clear need for more universal sponsored retirement accounts. The federal government has continued a guaranteed retirement account program that could help to provide retirement accounts for individuals that do not currently have access to them through their employers. There's also a need to reform the social safety net programs and tests that are required for individuals and families to receive benefits or to participate in these programs. Also, policymakers could limit the mortgage interest tax deduction and use revenues to fund a credit for first and perhaps even second-time home buyers. And lastly, there has been a swell of interest around the country in the potential of local and national reparations programs to address long-standing injustices and to increase Black wealth. So the federal solutions mentioned on this slide show that policymakers have an incredibly important role to play in eliminating racial and other wealth disparities, again, for women as well. By addressing what is driving economic inequality, these strategies could ensure that individuals and families actually have a fair and just shot at wealth building in this country. Thank you.
Was James Green trying to tell you to hurry up? Was that? Good afternoon, everyone. Let me just start by saying thank you to Raphael and Dr. Ford for lifting up this very important conversation and what I consider to be very critical when we talk about investment into place. Again, my name is Upendo Shabazz, and I have the privilege of leading North End Rise. North End Rise operates as a community quarterback, operating within the purpose-built communities model, national model rather. And as a community quarterback, we're working in Coleman Park, which is a neighborhood in West Palm Beach. We are one of 28 network members within the purpose-built communities family and one of 4 located in Florida. Purpose-built communities' mission is to break the cycle of intergenerational poverty by supporting local leaders who are engaged in long-term transformation efforts to create thriving neighborhoods that support economic mobility and positive health outcomes for residents. Our role as the community quarterback is to develop and maintain the trust of residents and institutionalize local leadership to ensure all partners are focused on collective, I'm gonna say that again, collective outcomes for both the neighborhood and the people who live there. And we do this by actively engaging residents in the revitalization process, ensuring that their voices are heard and their needs are addressed. We do this by influence and, where possible, control investments in capital projects. Also, we do this by coordinating efforts to create a comprehensive, sustainable transformation of the neighborhood. So let's talk about Coleman Park. So many of you in the room, how many of you all know about Coleman Park? Raise your hand. How many of you all grew up in Coleman Park? Okay. Now, for the ones who kept your hands raised that grew up in Coleman Park, please let me know when I'm not telling the truth about Coleman Park, okay? Because you know best, okay? So, Coleman Park boundaries are considered North 25th Street, south to Palm Beach Lakes, east-west between the railroad tracks, and also Coleman Park is home to 90% African Americans. And it comprises 1.7% of the city of West Palm Beach population. Now, what we know about Coleman Park is typical. It's a typical Black legacy neighborhood, and it stands as a testament to the resilience of Palm Beach County's African American population. When Black settlers were forcibly displaced from Palm Beach community known as the Sticks in the early 20th century, their homes was burned, for those who don't know that story. They rebuilt in Pleasant City. The community's professionals and entrepreneurs eventually established themselves in Coleman Park, transforming it into a vibrant center of Black culture and commerce, a center where the economic corridor was Tamarind Avenue. And if you grew up back in the day, Tamarind Avenue is where all of the Black businesses were. Yes. So we're talking about salons, we're talking about barbershops, we're talking about a grocery store, we're talking about anything that, when we look at traditional communities that are thriving, Coleman Park had that, and Tamarind Avenue was the economic corridor. So it was more than just a residential area. Coleman Park represented the achievement of self-sufficient middle-class African-American community where people truly worked, lived, and thrived together. Now, like most historically Black neighborhoods, Coleman Park faced profound challenges through desegregation. As barriers fell and opportunities opened elsewhere, many residents moved away, and this initial exodus, combined with the devastating policies around aggressive crime policies, led to systematic disinvestment of this community. Yes, yes. So while surrounding communities benefited from the CRA district funding, Coleman Park was excluded, resulting in today's landscape of public housing units, boarded up buildings, a commercial corridor that has seen no investment. And it doesn't look like it's what it used to look like. So as you can see, as a result of that disinvestment, I won't go through the facts that you see before you, but this is the result of that disinvestment. So, for those of you who know anything about place, prosperity starts with place. Now, we all have heard the American dream narrative. Do you all know what that American dream narrative is? Yes, no. What? Yes, if you work hard, you can make it, you can overcome, and you can achieve. If just you work hard, you have a sheer will to do it. So we have all been led to believe that this narrative is particularly true about poverty, and that poor individuals in communities like Coleman Park have failed to make the most of available opportunities. Therefore, poverty is a choice. This narrative is toxic, it's harmful, and it's not true. It doesn't account for all of the compounding effects of racism over time that's embedded in our systems and structures that dictates economic success in our country. So when we talk about the purpose-built communities model, it offers a counter to that narrative, and that prosperity starts with place. This model understands the role systems and policies play in shaping neighborhoods, whether they are prosperous or impoverished. Neither happen by accident, but by design. This model works at the neighborhood level, offering an effective solution to help overcome inequities and injustices that relegate many Black and brown people to under-resourced and disinvested neighborhoods. Now, acknowledging the history of the community, the model focuses on the legacy residents' dreams and aspirations for their neighborhood. Community partnership and providing healthy environment built around the 4 pillars that you see before you. So you have cradle to college education, mixed income housing, community wellness, and economic vitality. The core of this model is that we have a shared responsibility that all communities are treated fairly. And most importantly, the foundation to this model is the residents. Neighborhood revitalization is community building work that cultivates fellowship, mobilizes resources, and addresses social challenges like structural racism and poverty. It is essential to ensuring families and of all backgrounds and zip codes can thrive. So when we talk about prosperity starts with place, prosperity starts with place with people. And this model is focused again on the foundation of engaging the residents, and that's where North End Rise comes in at. So, although we do not lead with it, racial equity is at the core of the work. As you heard from Raphael and Dr. Ford about persistent poverty and why in some communities, particularly Black and brown communities, why there is such a huge disparity with regards to the wealth gap. So as the community quarterback, greater health outcomes and upward mobility are central to our approach of working in community. Racial equity is both a process and an outcome that we work to operationalize within the 4 pillars. Some examples include ensuring our partners are all values aligned, that we take care to understand the history of the neighborhood, both in terms of what residents desires and loves, and also the challenges that the residents are facing and living in. And we also work to identify the goals that will actually lift up this community and provide equal playing field. And more importantly, RISE works with residents, shifting the power to them. We honor and engage with all forms of knowledge, whether it's experiential or empirical. We share decision-making, powered by understanding that collaboration is imperative. We're grounded, we're transparent, and curious about asking questions. And we remain flexible and adaptive, because if you have ever done community work, it is messy. It is so messy. So you gotta understand, and doing this work, things change. And things change, so you have to be able to be flexible, and that's what this model allows for. So with regards to North End Rise, our goal is really to lift up this community by way of the residents' desires and needs, and working with partners in the community. See, I only have 4 slides, guys, so I'm gonna turn it back over to Raphael.
Okay, well, Dr. Green cut us to 1 question from our list and 1 question from the audience. But Dr. Green, what if we just give the 2 to the audience? I think that's probably a better, right? That's probably better. So I'm just going to put the mic here, and the first 2 people to step up to it get to ask the questions. Don't be shy.
Thank you. Thank you guys for coming out. So is there a model or models that you have learned from that have worked where we can get out of this mess?
Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to go back to the idea that we're working in the model of the purpose-built communities model. It has been around for about 27 years. One of the oldest communities is in East Lake, which is in Atlanta, and they are demonstrating that once you do collective work in those 4 pillars, that communities that look like a Coleman Park, which used to look like East Lake, they end up thriving. There has been increases in income, increase in educational outcomes, increase in health status with regards to residents. So the model does work, but it's going to take time. It doesn't happen overnight. This is intentional work and bringing people together and to leverage what is working for the community.
I know we're really pressed for time, so I'll just be really brief. I strongly encourage everyone in this room, if you've not heard about or looked into the potential of baby bonds, I think that is an incredibly powerful and promising solution. Baby bonds are currently being tested in Connecticut, in Vermont, in Washington, D.C., and in California, and it's showing incredible promise for boosting wealth for all Americans, but in particular communities of color, starting at a very early age and giving those young people a chance to use that the wealth that they're building throughout their youth and adolescence to either go to college and have fewer loans, or for like a down payment on a home.
And I'll add that there are some very good models that have grown around the collaboration between philanthropy, private capital, and government collaboration. And Baltimore, Cleveland, Detroit, Oakland, California have some great data coming out of them from programs that have realized that going back to City Hall or County Commission or state government isn't the way to do it. It has to involve the private sector, and philanthropy can play a very powerful role in that. So as we continue to build, and as RISE puts the purpose-built communities model in place, one of the things we're intent on is tracking our success, and I'm confident that we're going to be able to show the value of this type of work here in Palm Beach County.
All right, so we're going to take one more question, and hopefully the panelists for the workshops have already transitioned over. We'll take one more question, and then we'll allow you guys to go to that workshop.
Good afternoon, and thank you all for sharing this information, especially for adding the context, because we hear the data all the time, but many times the context is missing. My question is really about the purpose-built communities. And we know that this is not new, that for hundreds of years they've come into communities to redevelop and so forth. And I think kind of piggybacking off of what the other gentleman asked, what I know I've seen over the years working in community development is that there's a lot of energy, effort, and resources put into these communities working with residents to rebuild the communities. And the minute it happens, gentrification happens. Other people move in and take advantage of all of the hard work and investment that the longtime residents have put in. And so I guess my question then is, what do we do? I realize we don't want to discriminate against anyone, but we also want the people who are putting in the work to be able to benefit from that long term. And I have seen where houses then eventually get built, and those families that have been rooted in those communities for 50, 60, 70 years can no longer afford the property taxes. And it's just one thing after another that happens. So I was just wondering if you all had any insights into how we can prevent that from happening.
Thank you for that question. That's a very loaded question. So I will say this, you know, the positive in what she was describing is that that community has turned around, and that there are people who are wanting to come to that community now. So with regards to a purpose-built community's neighborhood, is that when you're working directly on the ground with residents and working with developers, and you're working with all of the services that are in the community, we have to be very, very transparent and honest with the residents to let them know that they have choice. They have choice in how they are going to continue to be in this community and to provide them with all the supports to keep them in the community with regards to increase the taxes. What does that look like for a family to stay there? What can we offer to them to keep them in that community? Additionally, I would say is that the purpose-built communities model also allows for others to come in to help really bring up the economics of that community. And so there's nothing wrong with that. It's all about how we engage the residents to be the priority and the first to access that opportunity. And that's the difference. I think it's keeping them with the supports that they need to stay there, but also allow them to have choice. You know, if we're able to keep a family in that community and then help them move up the economic ladder with improved housing, or an existing legacy family, keeping the home and the family. Maybe the parents aren't there, but there's heirs property there that we can help keep them in the home. But again, choice. A lot of times people come into these communities and then they end up not giving the homeowner choice with regards to having a difference with regards to the balance of their property. And so we always want the residents to have choice and all with regards to purpose-built communities.
Thank you.
Well, I'll just add very quickly that one model that I am intent on exploring is a community ownership model, or a community investment vehicle, as has been called. Thank you. Don't clap for me yet, I got to do it first. So Providence, Rhode Island has a very successful program being built there and up and running. Portland, Oregon has another, and a community ownership model allows community stakeholders to invest in a fund that owns and controls property in their neighborhood. And whether you can invest $50 a month or $5,000 a month, if you're a stakeholder in the community, you are invited to participate in that ownership model. What it does is not just helps return wealth to the neighborhood stakeholder group, it brings people to the table in the conversation about what happens in their community, and that's a very important part about the work that we're doing, so it's not being driven by forces that are out of the control of the stakeholders that we are working on the behalf of.
All right, let's give all of our panelists and moderators a big round of applause. Thank you so very much for the informative session. We are going to transition. They are in the rooms waiting for you, so please check out our workshops and be back here after.